Yeah. I think it's awesome that the person that you are, I mean, aside from who you actually are, but a Canadian professor became this great gadfly of the left, of what I would call the stupid left, not the real left, which I hope there's some left, or rather remaining.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
on
yeah.
um, but of all the people, Canadian, I always think of Canadians as people who this they're so good at, they're part of America, but they're also not.
Mhm.
They can be it, but also I feel like they look at us from a distance, and that's why their satire is so great.
Yeah.
And their, uh,
Well, and there's plenty to make fun about Canada too, so, we like to do that. But it's a terrible thing when Canada has become politically interesting. The world is close to ending when that's the case.
well, and sometimes politically stupid.
Well, yeah, often.
I mean, I read a quote from Justin Trudeau, which was so dumb, and
Which one?
what, is he always dumb?
He always lies, as far as I can tell, all the time.
Right,
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard him say a word that I thought was true.
really.
Hmm.
Okay, I see. We don't really follow it that, and I mean, I just thought, oh, here's this, great-looking guy. Ivanka seems to want to fuck him, and Canada. I mean, how it's hard to fuck up Canada, but yeah, the quote I read was they asked him something about the protest because you had a big controversy about protests, right, with the truckers.
Truckers, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it was he was referring to them, but the quote was about protests in general. It was something like, "We have a vibrant democracy here in Canada, and we value protests." But it was something like, "But when you use protest to protest, or to object to the policies of the government, I think you're going too far." Well, what the fuck is protest for, except to object to the policies of the government? And I thought,
It was quite shocking, everything that happened in that protest, because they seized the bank accounts of 200 Canadians, and that was not amusing. And Trudeau has no idea what that did to Canada's international reputation. That was not a good precedent.
okay, wait, go back.
Mhm.
They seized the bank accounts of what
200
people
Canadians.
who were in the
They
protest?
seized some bank accounts of some people who only sent money to the protest, like through Give, Send, Go, and GoFundMe and so forth. So,
Oh, I see.
yeah. So you didn't even have to be at the protest.
When you say seized, they froze it. They didn't
Froze
take
it.
they didn't take their money. They just froze it. So
They
didn't.
froze their credit cards. They froze their mortgage payments. They
Yeah.
locked them out. So they locked them out of the financial system entirely.
That is creepy.
It's really bad. In
That
fact,
is-
one of the banks actually apologized. There's 5 big banks in Canada, and one of them actually apologized for doing it eventually. They all should have apologized, but one did. Yeah, it was really bad. It was shocking. Canadians aren't sufficiently shocked about it, partly because they don't really understand what that did to Canada's international reputation. But it was absolutely, I can't imagine a politician doing anything more inappropriate than that, right? No trial, no real investigation. Plus, Trudeau claimed that the trucker convoy was financed by MAGA, Republican Americans, which is completely preposterous because, first of all, why would MAGA Republican Americans foment dissent in Ottawa? Like, even if they knew where it was, which they don't, and they don't care, and why would they? And so, first of all, it was the Russians. It's like, oh yes, that's the Russians' primary concern. And then it was like literally MAGA Republican Americans funding the trucker protests in Ottawa. When do you think the left goes too far?
May I use my lifeline?
Yeah, absolutely. Call the people who know.
Okay. What I mean, you mean they haven't already?
Well,
I mean,
but how do you know? Like, what's a marker
when Trump
for
gets
you?
reelected? That's when you know.
What would you regard as behavior on the left that's unacceptable from the perspective of someone who's essentially liberal?
How long have you got? I mean, the theme I've been trying to promulgate as much as I can the last 5 years, partly just in self-defense of people who say I've changed, I have not, is that wokeness is not something that expands on liberalism. It's something that undoes it. And I think you are on the same page generally. I mean, to give a few examples, color blindness. wanting to have a colorblind society where we don't see race is classic liberalism. Certainly what Obama was going for. That's not wokeism. Wokeism is race is front and center to everything.
Yeah, so that's part of that. So that, to me, that's an extension of the insistence that someone's primary identity is signified by their group.
Right. Which again, this is exactly what old school liberals were fighting against. Don't characterize somebody by that. Okay, so they completely invert it, and then they get mad at us for somehow we're conservatives now. No, we're not conservatives. You're just not what liberals are. You're doing a different thing, which is fine. We're all allowed to do our thing, but you can't do this whole different thing and then take the term that used to apply but doesn't apply anymore. I mean, there's many colleges that have segregated dorms. Okay, again, you do
and
you.
Graduation ceremonies.
Yes, you do you, but this is not liberalism, okay? And certainly in the realm of gender, I mean, liberalism is always about tolerance for let's celebrate and allow everyone to be protected and respected for who they are. That includes homosexuality, that includes trans, which of course is a real thing that happens. That's different than rewriting the anatomy book from page 1 so that every kid who comes out, it's a jump ball and there's no such thing as sex, it's only gender. And again, this is something different. It's not liberalism. So you can't say, oh, you don't believe in that, you're not a liberal. Freedom of speech used to be a whole liberal thing. We used to own the First Amendment like the conservatives owned the Second. That's reversed. I mean, something like the homeless. It was liberals who, I used to do the show on HBO, Comic Relief. We're going to help get the homeless off the street. Now it's how dare you ask them to get off the street. So you can keep the homeless on the street and you can have, segregated dorms and all that. But that's liberalism? It's not. It's something different. So
there's a line of research that's been developing, I guess, over the last 6 or 7 years that I think is very relevant to this. And because I've been thinking more and more thoroughly that the culture war is actually not a political battle at all, that the political battle is a facade for the actual battle. So,
which is?
Well, there's a group of researchers, most of them centered originally at the University of British Columbia, who started studying the subclinical manifestations of psychopathy. So there's a guy there named Robert Hare, and Robert Hare was the first psychologist who really studied psychopaths. And he developed a checklist for psychopathic behavior and the diagnostic criteria. It never became a formal diagnostic criteria, but criminologists have used it a lot. And if you're psychopathic, you're much more likely, for example, to be a repeat offender. And so he delineated the core psychopathic traits. And there's 2 sets of core psychopathic traits. So the first core dimension is something like predation. It's like, if I'm a psychopath, whatever's yours is rightfully mine. And if you can't defend yourself against me taking it, that's just an indication of the kind of weakness that makes you a viable moral target, right? You're too weak to resist. You're too, what would you call it? You're too contemptible to even bother with. So not only can I take your stuff, but morally I'm obligated to.
You say this very convincingly. Yeah. I know you're adopting the voice of them, but I'm just saying it.
Yeah.
You could play this part beautifully.
Yeah, well, I've watched people like that a fair bit. And the second dimension is parasitism. And so that's a more subtle form of predation. And someone with a parasitical lifestyle will adjust their attitude towards you so that so that you'll do the work and support them, and they'll do that however they can get you to do it. They'll use the sense of proclamation of victimization, for example, is one of the strategies that the parasitical psychopaths use.
Like the stripper's boyfriend who doesn't have a job.
Yeah, right. Or pimps.
We come from different schools of thought.
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask a dumb layman question before we finish this.
Yeah.
I would love to know, and I'm sure I was told, the difference between sociopath and psychopath.
It's not really a relevant distinction.
Really?
Yeah. It's not really a relevant distinction.
Okay. So predation and parasite.
Right. So a psychopath is a predatory parasite, and that means they're very, very low in agreeableness, no empathy, tend to be callous. That's the personality manifestation. They're very unconscientious. They will not formulate or keep verbal contracts.